So I'm Nabil, I'll be your host for the evening. You may remember me from previous Essence events. I'll just give you a quick intro to the some of our speakers and the event that we have tonight, and then I will hand over to some of our exciting content. So a bit of background on the meetup itself. For those of you who are new to Essence for Agility, we are a community aimed to explore Essence, which is a standard that describes all the practices and methods that better enable us to pick the right set of practices to suit our context, regardless of which method they belong to. We call this freeing the practices from the method prisons, in a rather poetic phrase. So that's a quick summary of what this meetup group is about. So we explore Essence, but we also explore, more broadly, Agile and Agility. And tonight we have a super special and exciting event for you. We've got Kanban and Essence, a partnership that we'd like to present and that we'd like to go into a bit of detail about, so you can see how you can learn about how it benefits you. We have some awesome speakers. We have Ivar himself, who I'm sure most of you are familiar with already, the co-creator of Essence, among other things, so he'll be involved in tonight's meetup. We have David Anderson, founder of the Kanban Method, with us as well to present the Kanban side of the talk, so very much looking forward to talking with him. We have Simon and Joey, who will also be joining us, and they'll be demonstrating some of the more hands-on and practical elements of the Essence and Kanban partnership with some interactive exercises that will hopefully bring tonight to life. So that's a quick overview of who's speaking and what we're going to be exploring. And I believe we have an intro from Ivar and David lined up to also kick us off. So Ivar, would you like to give us an introduction?
Of course, I'm more than happy to do that. Yeah, it's now almost more than 20 years since I started to work with the ideas that now are in Essence. I was not very young anymore. Many people at that age retired. I started myself as an expert on, kind of expert, on things like use cases, components, architecture. I'd become more and more of a guru, meaning a methodology salesperson. I felt that was not needed. I looked around the world and at all these methods, and they were separate, like isolated islands. They had their own language, they had their own vocabulary, to some shared vocabulary, but never really defined. And the world is not much different today. We looked like a fashion industry. Every some years, we changed fashion. And that meant the old way of dressing up were thrown out. We had a methods war, in the meaning there were sects around every method, and in that sect they loved what they were doing, and they defended that against anything else. So we were relying on gurus, which I also always has felt a little immature, to say the least. Not just experts. I think there's a huge difference between an expert and a guru. We had no common ground between these methods, no shared vocabulary. The way we present the method was very different. And then we had this split between industry practice and academic research. Almost nothing in the academic world were adopted and used, apart from computer science. I'm talking about methodology, software engineering, and the other way around. I remember when component-based development was adopted by Ericsson, and I met a professor from famous university. He told me this is a backend. you will have to go back. Components are wrong. And we know what happened to components. It took 20 years or something more before Microsoft made them popular. I call these things the crazy things in method adoption. We shouldn't have to have things like that. Instead, imagine we could change this world. Instead of having all these isolated methods, each described in a unique way, but old-fashioned, because the way they are described was invented many years ago, and to change is very difficult and hard. Imagine we could find a common ground for them that allow us to compare methods, to build an ecosystem from which any team, any organization can select the practices and the parts of methods that they would like to have. They use the same language, so they can easier understand, compare, and the different methods. Could that be done? Moreover, imagine that methods were not just passive. Every method I know of today is passive. It's presented with websites and slides or books or whatever. Imagine we can make methods active. So we actually, when you work, you get support from the method. So at that time, we started the work on what became Essence. It's almost 20 years ago. In 2014, Essence became a standard adopted by Object Management Group. Hundreds of people worked on polishing, improving the result. And it's not just about software. It's about basically any engineering work. Now, having this standard, we could also achieve another objective. Imagine all these people who have invented methods. I don't know it's about you, David, but I know that, for instance, Scrum has been adopted in other methods and rewritten, so it's not recognizable in some aspects. And that means that the people who invented it, they have, in best cases, just got the pad on their shoulder, and they're not part of its use. It's taught in a different way. It's and rewarded is in a different way. I think if you have an ecosystem of practices, the people who invented the practices should be the ones who approve them in the ecosystem. And then, of course, there can be developments. But primarily, the originator should be very clear. And there should be ways to for them to be part of a future and not just history. So I am, of course, very happy that we have been having this partnership and worked with Dave and Joe and others to find the relationship. I later talk about why I think it's so valuable to have this partnership. But this is at least a few words about where I come from.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Ivar. Very poetic journey you've been on. David, why don't you tell us a bit about your journey?
I have a question for Ivar. When you were at Rational, did you work with a Microsoft colleague of mine called Sam Guckenheimer?
Oh, Sam, it's a very good friend.
Yeah, right. So we have a friend in common called Sam Guckenheimer.
We have many.
And he used to sit next to me when we worked at Microsoft about, well, not quite 20 years ago now. And he said he would often repeat the reason that the the fighting, the squabbling in the methodology space is so vicious is because the stakes are so low. And if people thought bigger, and if you like, maybe the whole industry and market was bigger, then there would be plenty of space for everyone. There wouldn't be the same amount of bitchy fighting. And there's been a lot of truth to that. The copying of people's work and modifying it, failure to credit it, etc. I think a lot of that is because the stakes are so low, and it's petty, immature behavior, to be honest. So, given that Ivar gave you some background, I'll confess that I'm not quite at retirement age yet. But there are days when I get up and I think maybe it would be a nice idea. So I got started in the software industry in the very early 1980s, like 1980, 1981. I was a teenager and I started messing around with microcomputers that had arrived then. And 3 or 4 years later, I was quite a successful games developer. So my first career was working in games development, mostly programming in Z80 assembly language and 68,000 for computers like the ZX Spectrum and the Atari ST and the Commodore Amiga. And then I retired from my first career and I went to university where I studied control system engineering, and specifically wind turbine design, of all things. But the government pulled the funding from the research for the wind turbine design. So instead, I got a job at a 5-year-old software company in Scotland, where I became the manager in 1991. So my first management job in charge of software development, product development, innovation was in 1991, which is now, that's a scary long time, 32 years ago. And really at that point, my exposure to software engineering processes and the academic part of it was what I picked up from my undergraduate degree. However, some years later, I got the chance to work with Peter Code. I'm sure some of you on this group know who Peter is. Ivar certainly does, Tom Gelb well. And Peter was a huge influence on my life, my career. He got me my first book deal, which led to the book Agile Management for Software Engineering that appeared in 2003. So I worked with Peter for a couple of years while I was living in Singapore. And what came out of that work was published by Peter and my boss, Jeff DeLuca, and later my colleague, Stephen Palmer, as feature-driven development. And that was considered to be one of the lightweight methods that led to the Agile movement. So I got into the Agile space before it was called Agile, and through coincidence more than anything else. When I left Singapore, I moved to the United States. And within a year or so later, I was leading a team at Sprint's .com business unit, which was looking at how might we do clever things on the internet with mobile phones and related things like how can you pay your bill, contact customer care, etc. via the web. So I had a department of about 36 people doing software development in a business unit of about 350 people. There were 3 identical departments to mine. And it was a new business unit that had been formed within a year. With a reasonable sum of money, for a startup within a big company, they had $70 or $80 million a year as a budget. And it was a bit chaotic. It was a nascent, low maturity organization. And I made an appointment to go talk to the boss, the vice president, and his secretary scheduled it for me. And when I met with him, I basically said, I'd love to do some kind of lunch and learn, or talk to the business unit and explain to people how we do this feature-driven development thing and how we can get this place under control. And my reward for that was to be given a more senior position in the business unit. And then very quickly to be given the challenge of, okay, whatever your department can do, get the rest of the business unit to do it without having any positional power. And the challenge, therefore, of having one essentially archetypal group that was performing with very good engineering practices and a good reputation for delivering on time and with good quality. And to get these other departments in the business unit to copy it. So that was an interesting learning experience, because in theory, everyone sat on the same floor of the same building. They all developed code for the same website. They all did it using the same development tools on the same platform with the same IDE. They shared the same testing department and the same operations unit, the same user experience department, and a number of other shared services. They were using the same version control system, and so on and so on. In fact, the entire list of engineering tools being used was identical, except for one department that was doing the e-commerce part of the website, where they had some additional infrastructure, something called Blue Martini for anyone with a long memory. So all of these departments looked identical. And you would think that you could take the process from one department and duplicate it. And that didn't work. It wasn't a miserable failure. We only doubled the productivity of the other groups in the business unit. But I considered it a failure because my group was producing code using the same analysis method and so on, because it's a fairly rigorous thing, feature-driven development in Peter Code's methodology. My group was going 5 times faster. So the people who reported to me were outperforming everyone else by a factor of 5. But those people had doubled from where they had started from the baseline. And therefore, what was wrong with everyone else? Why were they not doing it right? And about the same time, I was writing the manuscript for my first book. And I was inspired by the work of Eli Goldratt and the idea in his theory of constraints of the process of ongoing improvement, or what he calls the POOGI. And the POOGI was the idea that you have the wiring in your organization to improve in an evolutionary manner, that you find one thing that's broken and you fix that one thing, and then you find the next one, you fix it, and so on and so on. So I came to this conclusion that the other parts of the business unit, they were resisting, not because they thought the processes were a bad idea or for some religious affiliation, because we didn't really have Scrum at that time or anything else from the Agile space. They were resisting simply because it was change and because they were human. And I developed this belief that it wouldn't matter what methodology you were trying to introduce to one department or the whole business unit, or for that matter, much wider across the enterprise at Sprint, the human beings were going to resist. And my gut feeling was about 80% of them would resist, regardless of what you suggested the methodology should be. And therefore, we needed a different approach to introducing software engineering process improvement. And that's how I got started on what we now call the Kanban method, because it isn't about having some framework or methodology. It's about wiring the organization so that it can improve and to be focused on outcomes. And if you're not producing the outcome that your customer expects, if you're not meeting their expectations, their fitness criteria for what represents good service, you're not good enough yet. You have to improve. So focus on outcomes and then figure out the relationship between the outcome and the practices that you're following and what might be missing that's failing to produce the right outcome, and then hopefully fill that practice gap. Now, that's been a 20+ year journey so far, where I've discovered that practice adoption is difficult if you don't have the right culture, and modifying and adapting culture is impossible if you don't have the right leadership. So to modify the culture, we need to lead with values and change the values in an organization. And to do that, we need to develop leaders. So the Kanban method and the Kanban maturity model that we've published has expanded to be this leadership development program, organizational maturity development program, advice and guidance on how to hack the culture of an organization in order to pave the way for the right practice adoption. And by and large, Kanban's practice agnostic. That's why people can use it for advertising agencies or pharmaceutical research or processing expense payments in finance departments or recruitment activities in HR departments. And the list goes on and on and on. It's not specifically a software engineering methodology, even though that's where we started. So it very much seems to me that Ivar and I have been focused on a very similar problem, maybe coming at it from slightly different motivation and a different angle, but nevertheless pursuing how can we improve software engineering and related activities in an incremental evolutionary fashion, which is agnostic of defined process definitions, methodologies. That I think, as I've studied a little more over the years, the academic history of methodologies, they are really wired to meet with resistance. That fundamentally a software engineering methodology, first thing to learn is people who do software engineering were not good at their native language when they were at school. So if, like me, you went to Strathclyde University to study software engineering, you couldn't pick a better place in the United Kingdom to do that. You probably chose that subject because you weren't good at the English language when you were in high school. And that's why software engineering methodologists don't understand the meaning of the word methodology. We have our own particular meaning for it. And it basically means a defined process that includes the definition of the roles, the responsibilities, the things people do, the handoffs between them, and so forth. It describes an organizational structure, a social structure. And as soon as you come along with a different version of that, you disrupt the social order. That fundamentally human beings are pack animals. And I notice the Agile community obsesses with psychology. They think that everything that goes on in software development happens between the ears of the individuals. Therefore, it's a psychological problem. But if you want to lead large groups of people to get anything done, whether it's building the pyramids or building the trading platform for an investment bank, it's a sociological problem. Sociology is the big leverage.
David, I apologize to interrupt. I'm just checking time. I was wondering if there's a summary. I'm just conscious that we have a great agenda that I'd love to get to.
I'm just finished, right? That the problem is sociological, and methodologies disrupt the social order. Software engineering methodologies are programmed to fail if you try to implement them with human beings. This is the fundamental truth. Because as soon as you try to change someone's role, their responsibilities, the social structure, how they relate to other people, humans are wired to resist that. Their brains are wired to resist that. So coming along with some prescriptive methodology and saying, let's install it in our organization is doomed to failure. And it's not just a problem over the last 50 years, it will still fail 500 years from now. That approach is doomed to failure. It is incompatible with the human condition. And unless we can focus on incremental ways, what social psychologists call normative changes rather than structural changes, and a normative change would be introducing a new practice one at a time, mostly. A simplification, mostly. Unless we can focus on that and delivering what social psychologists call incremental change, as opposed to dramatic structural change, we're not going to make progress as a profession. So the fact that Essence is encouraging this incremental change using the adoption of new practices in a normative fashion, that's moving us in the right direction. And that's why I'm supporting this initiative.
Lovely. Thank you so much, David. That really shed a lot of insight into your position behind the partnership. And hopefully that gave the audience a bit of insight as well. And apologies again for the interruption. So now that we've heard some background from Eva and David on, how we got to this point, I think Simon and Joey have kindly prepared some examples to bring this to life. So I'll hand over to them.
Thank you, Nabil. And that's fascinating. It seems a shame to divert the thinking a little bit now, but what we want to do is to talk to you a bit about what we've done in creating what we call an essentialized version of the Kanban practices. And I've been working with this with Joey. A lot of the early work was done by Ian Spence, who's on the call, and he's come up with the structure. Because with essentializing a practice, there's very often many different ways to do it. And what we try to do is to reflect what the practice author intent is, rather than trying to rewrite it and improve it or change it. We just try to reflect it, but do so using the Essence language and do so in a series of cards as a form factor and a user experience. So we've got some cards. I'll show you them in a second, and then we'll show you a couple of ways that you can use the cards. And the game that we want to show you with is intentionally simple, and it's intentionally applying some of the kind of fundamental elements of Kanban about starting with where you are and about making small evolutionary change. I said we'll start simple, so I'm going to show you the cards, but I don't want to go through them, mainly because the Kanban practitioner is what, a 2-day course, and we've not got 2 days to explain it all to you. I would argue that perhaps essentializing it means you can teach it a little bit faster, a bit more effectively, but certainly not in 10 minutes.
Simon, have we introduced Joey?
Not yet. Well, only at the very beginning.
That's fine. I mean, I'm happy for Simon to take the wheel and run with it, and then we have a plan. Simon's going to show something, David, and then I'll show something. So,
all right, very good.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure the audience knew who Joey actually was.
Yeah, we'll get to that very shortly here for sure. And
it's a good point. I should have been more polite earlier, sorry. So I'll show you the cards, and then once we had the cards, we set on a kind of feedback session with Kanban University, led by Joey, working with some of the other consultants and trainers in order to test the cards and prove that they had value, and we'll talk about that in a second. But I will just show you what the cards look like and what we mean by an essentialized practice. So we've got two sets of cards, and we very often do this where a practice has some values or principles or core beliefs. We separate them out into a core foundation practice. So in Kanban, the foundation practice has the general practices, it has the change management principles, the service delivery principles, and the classes of service archetype. And the way that we present the practice is like this. It's got some cards. The cards describe different elements of the practice. We've got some points where you can bounce off into further detail because the cards necessarily just have a summary. If you want the further level of detail, you've got the Kanban guide and you've got the KMM Plus in Kanban's case. So we've got the set of the principles and general practices. And then the second pack of cards is what we call Team Kanban Essentials. So we focused this on the lower levels of maturity, working with Kanban teams and following the Kanban guide as the source. And that's got a number of elements. We've got things like the services and work items, the physical things you'll see, like the Kanban board and the service system definitions, and then the activities that people conduct. So the static workshop, team replenishment, team retrospective, and things like that. So you can see that the practice is broken up into a number of cards.
Sorry, we just had a request to increase the Zoom size, just so some people can view the text a bit better, if possible.
I can do. I kind of consciously kept it a bit smaller to stop people trying to feel that they need to read them all. But you can see if I zoom in on one of the cards, there's the core Kanban metrics one. It's got some text on it. Other cards have got little icons, little pictures that show the essentialization of them. And there's an essence language that underpins it that we can talk about, but I'll not do it now because we'll get into the depths. The other thing we can do is use the cards and tooling to show a picture of a practice. So I've got a couple of quick examples. One is where we've got the cards and you can arrange them on a board like this. And this is a nice game to play, actually, where you take the pack of cards and you get a team to say, what does this practice mean to you? Let's lay it out. So in this case, you've got the collections of the orange cards, and then you've got the relationships between the purple cards. So you can see in the center here, we've got the service, and then around it, you've got things like the team replenishment. You've got the three elements that talk about continuous improvement. And we've got some tooling that we're going to launch publicly quite soon, where you can do this in a slightly simpler way, where instead of having the big cards like the service, I've got little tokens for them, and I can click on the token and I can read what the essence language says about that element. And this is a nice way just to give a quick summary of a practice. So we've got the cards. What are we going to do with them? So I'd like to bring Joey in to talk about how we can actually put these cards into practice, and not necessarily by using the whole 20 or 30 cards, but maybe just with a few.
Yeah, thanks so much, Simon. And just really briefly, I'm Joey Spooner. I'm the Vice President for Product Management and Community Development here at Kanban University. I'm excited that you're all here. Some of you know how to use Zoom really well. And for those who do, can you give me a thumbs up to indicate you've worked with the Kanban method before? This will help me figure out how to share some of this information. Okay, I see some thumbs up going there. Excellent. Beautiful. All right, so we got some Kanban knowledgeable people here. All right. Oh, wow. Lots of good people. Great. So you guys, about half of you, it looks like, if not more, are probably familiar with the Kanban method. And so like Simon was saying, he's essentialized a lot of what we talk about in the beginning stages of the Kanban method. So, David had mentioned the idea of maturity, a maturity model. We have this idea that, people get started with where they are now. And so we're thinking about the basics and how to get the basics across to people. And what I want to show you now is a very basic starting point for what is effectively a retro. So some of you might be running retros, you might be running what we call service delivery reviews. Basically, areas for improvement is one of the key topics of the conversation for this. And in our example here, what we have is a team of people. And in this case, someone may say, hey, here's some things that are not working for us, and they collect it. So some of you might be running retros or something like a feedback kind of conversation. And basically, you're going to collect back this feedback. And then the next step really is to figure out, well, can we do this? Is this something we can fix? Can we address it? Or, could we actually solve it ourselves? So in this case, you can see how there's this area, mandated security test. We can't fix that problem. And then we've got a couple here. For example, the build broke due to automated testing. We might need some help for that. But here are some ones over here. For example, like we are not consistent in how we work. We're really not clear with our policies. We think we can solve that problem ourselves. Okay, now the person facilitating this might want to dig in. And so what they say, for example, here in this simulation, they say, hey, you know what? Why don't we give a card to each team member? And so we have this problem. We're not clear on policies. Why don't we go through and investigate with the Essence cards what we might be able to do to improve? So right down here, they took the Essence cards and they said, okay, here's the visualize, make policies explicit. Some of you guys, like you said, you kind of know Kanban method already. These are probably familiar to you. But what we're doing now is we're saying, hey, we're not clear on the policies. We feel frustrated with that. What are some ideas based on these cards that we can generate off of? So we have, for example, limiting work in progress. That may be working. That may be a solution to this not clear on policies. But there are also some other ones that look kind of interesting, like what policies do you think we have? Do we know that clearly? Do we have them written down? And most importantly, do we have them visualized anywhere? And you can see what this person did is they said, all right, well, let's kind of cluster these and dot vote on them. And in this example, they clustered them together here and here, and let this one out on its own. And you can see where they voted. And there's some serious votes around maybe policy type work. So maybe we can run an experiment on how we visualize our policies. So from there, they took one idea, a couple ideas actually, and they said, hey, why don't we do our policies workshop? Make sure that we really know our policies. So some of you have been trained in KSD. You might know this thing called static. Excuse the acronym soup here for a second. But basically, you know how to build a Kanban board. And one of the things we do is we try to figure out where are you right now with the policies that you have in place. And sometimes people start off without this static thing, without the KSD training. But this is a great way to kind of get that started. And you can see here where they're actually running a policies workshop. They're trying to figure out what do we have in terms of policies. Maybe there's some new ones that would be probably experiments to run to see how we can improve what we're doing here. And then agree on when we're going to review and approve, and then put them somewhere visually. So the ones that we know we have now, let's make them visual, either in the digital tool that we're using or in the room where we have our Kanban board. And then we're going to come back maybe about every Thursday afternoon and review this and see how things are going. And maybe also run an experiment to try and expedite late. So what they're finding is they're blowing past some of their policies, not even aware of what their policies are. And maybe they have a policy they need to say, wait, this work really is important to do. We need to treat it differently. So we need to treat it with what we call class of service here, a better class of service, a higher class of service. And so that's the beginning of what you have in terms of using these cards. This is just one scenario where as a facilitator for feedback conversations, you can use them to basically bounce off some ideas and see where people might want to go for experiments in terms of evolutionary change and how we kind of grow in that direction. And that's just a very short example. Hopefully this gives people an idea of what we're thinking about. Simon, did you want to add more to that?
Yeah, I think that was great. One thing I would just add is that it shows one of the benefits of Essence, where you can take just a bit of a practice, and that could be the principles like we've seen here, or it could be an activity or an event or a particular work product, and just focus on that one thing and help a team really understand that one thing and how they can really improve with that, without having to take the whole practice in one go. And that kind of plays both into the evolutionary change bit, but also into how do you start with where you are and improve and build that continuous improvement into your way of working. So we've just taken a tiny bit of the Kanban practices and shown you how the cards can help. And the cards bring that gameplay in. Like Joey said, in real life, if you've got the cards in front of you, you'd distribute them out to the team or get them to draw a card and talk about it, rather than and one person lead the whole event, which comes back to David's point about, people being inhibited or restrictive to change, and getting them more involved and more collaborative can help.
Yeah, and one more thing to add there, because it is worth mentioning. Sometimes they'll say visualize, they'll look at the card and they'll be like, what's visualization? They could also visit KMM Plus, for example, and dive in deeper on the visualization options that are there. So it kind of opens up the conversation around where do we dig deeper? How do we dig deeper? What are our options on the table? So this can become a really fun exercise for a lot of people to explore what options are there to kind of think through how they might want to improve. Yeah. Great.
Are there any, apart from the question about how do we get the cards, and I'll share a website link at the end that you can go to download the cards, see the instructions for that game, and also a couple of other games. Are there any questions you'd like us to cover just now before we come back to David and Ivar to talk a bit more about their thoughts? We picked a simple game that was easily understood, Joey. That was the aim.
Yes, and keep in mind, folks, one thing I will do right now is just, since you guys are really good at the thumbs up, how many of you guys think you can do this today? Thumbs up, I could do this today, I could get this done, I could use these cards and do this. Yeah, I see some thumbs going up. Okay, that's good. That's good. So some people are feeling pretty good about this. Some people are still probably figuring out what to do with it. Yeah. So those who didn't raise up your thumbs, if you're sitting there going, I don't know, feel free to ask a question here or to critique it. Okay, one good question here. Did I miss how you measure success? So good question here, Bernie. We didn't talk about that a whole lot. So in this case, what we're looking at is problems coming in from the retro. And then we figure out, how do we improve where we are right now? How do we start to tackle that with some of the practices of the Kanban method? So when I think about measuring success, it's typically around how do we start to improve? How do we start to evolve? So I'm measuring it on that level, not a big level, right? There are other ways to measure success, but we're trying to keep it somewhat simple and local to where the team could make the change happen, for example, in this particular one.
Is the question, how do you measure success while using Essence? Or how do you measure success when using Kanban or something else?
Yeah, great question, David. So feel free to add to that one, Bernie, if you want to feedback. And feel free to unmute yourself, by the way. I don't think we're...
Yeah, I think that's the best way, because I've got fat fingers. So what I was, really the success of this change. So how do you measure that you're on the right track, that the changes that you're implementing, you mentioned earlier about tying them to outcomes, which I think is obviously very important. So it's really, how do you get everybody on board and say, yeah, we're moving in the right direction here?
There's maybe two levels of answer to that. The standard Kanban method answer would be, you need to understand your customers' expectations, or the outcomes that you're looking for, and you're measuring yourself against those outcomes. And therefore you can ask yourself, are you making progress against those outcomes? The one slight problem with that answer is a significant part of the market is too low maturity to even start there. Like, who's our customer? What do you mean they've got expectations? And if they do, how do we make it measurable? How do we quantify it in some way? The market can be very low maturity there. So there are people who can't do that, that they need help just being able to, metaphorically speaking, tie their own shoelaces before they can start worrying about, am I waiting the tables and are the customers satisfied? So then I think the separate question would be, can we demonstrate that we're making progress with the method adoption?
Yes, that's what I'm mostly interested in.
Right,
yeah.
and from a Kanban perspective, we would do that using the Kanban Maturity Model, which Joey hinted at when he mentioned KMM.plus, which is the online platform for the maturity model. I think it's a separate question for Simon and Ivar as to whether they have a mechanism for measuring, I guess, competency or capability using Essence, and can you show progress that you're getting better at using Essence? But from a Kanban perspective, you demonstrate you're making progress with the methodology using the maturity model. And actually that should be observable in better outcomes, better business outcomes. But at very low maturity levels, it's not so much about satisfying customers. That the nickname for level 1 is never the same way twice. Right. And then level 2 is that, yes, we have some defined repeatable process, but it's never the same outcome twice.
Very good. Yeah.
Right. So there is a way of observing the behavior of the organization and the outcomes to know where you're at on the maturity model without standing with the clipboard checking off practice adoption.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. Well, thank you. That's very helpful.
And just very briefly, from an Essence perspective, there's a number of ways that you can do that. There's Essence measures progress by what state you're in and whether you remain in that state or whether you advance. So there's a state achievement element to measuring progress. And then a lot of these games that we talk about, they've probably got an element of self-selection, but you measure how confident you are applying a practice, or you measure how well you think you're doing it, and then you can come back to that assessment in the team and see if you've increased your confidence as a result of your experiment or not. And good facilitation and good design can create more quantifiable methods and measures. Okay,
that's helpful. I think the thing is that we were talking earlier on about you've got to get 80% of the organization that are resisting change. And I was interested in what are the little things here you can show and say, look, guys, this is moving in the right direction. I think you guys have answered that. Thank you.
Yeah, there's a very simple principle that we teach Kanban coaches in some of our advanced training, that when you're asking people to change their behavior and adopt new practices or new tools or whatever it might be, the focus should be on this will make you a better version of yourself. It's not a whole new you. Right? Peter Senge wrote in the 5th discipline that people don't resist change, they resist being changed. So if you come along and offer them a new job title and you roll different responsibilities, you restructure the social order, they'll resist that. But if you come along and offer them some way of being a better version of themselves, then they'll embrace that because it can only enhance their social status, their recognition, their respect that they get within the existing social structure. So a critical tool in approaching change is to find the practices that can be adopted in a normative way where the benefit is this will make you a better version of yourself.
Great, thank you.
Who wouldn't want to be a better version of themselves? Indeed, lovely. So thank you so much, Simon and Joey, for that little practical demonstration and for the quick Q&A we had there. We'll hopefully have time for a couple more questions at the end. But so now we've seen how Essence can be used to describe Kanban. We obviously learned more about Kanban from David's perspective as well. And that Essence, can be an approach to decompose a practice into the elements, meaning that we can focus on parts of it in order to bring about the evolutionary change to a team or organization. I have a couple questions now for David and Eva, so I'd like to invite them both back into a conversation. I'd like to learn more about the partnership that you've talked about. So how has the journey been to date? Has there been any challenges or successes that you would like to share with us? Maybe David, you'd like to kick us off?
Well, I first met Ian, who's on the call. Ian, I want to say it was not quite 18 months ago. It was at the beginning of October 2021. But that happened to coincide with a family emergency for me, and I had to disappear and deal with a bereavement in our family. So I haven't been terribly involved since that initial meeting with Ian. It's mostly been Joey who's been driving it. So I'll invite Joey to talk more about the experience of working with Ivar and Ian and Simon and the rest of the team.
Thanks, David. My quick answer is it's like when someone speaks Spanish and someone speaks English and they meet each other on the road for the first time, and we're trying to figure out, well, is a cup a cup? Yeah, a cup is a cup. So we had to do a lot of sorting through, understanding the concepts and activities from Essence's perspective and translate that into the Kanban's perspective as well. So it's been an interesting journey along the way. And I've had a great time working with both Ian and Simon on this process. Ivar, did you want to say something to that? Or Simon?
I think Simon has been one of Ian, of course, too, have been doing most of the work. I've been enjoying the progress immensely. I also see a lot of value in what KMM can do for the industry. Actually, I use a strong word, the industry. It's not only software. And but I think Simon could probably take over here as well as you did.
Yeah, I think one thing that I found really sort of stimulating and enjoyable was the fact that we co-created a lot of this stuff with Joey, but also with some of the wider Kanban consultant community, some of which I know are on the call. And some of the ideas that came up in the workshops and the challenges with the game. One thing that I've taken quite strongly is not to overreach, not to try to convey too much information in one go. And that's been really helpful in developing the right games. So it was very much a collaborative effort, which was really enjoyable.
Awesome. Great to hear that you guys have been on a great journey together. I'm curious what your current focus is. So what are the next steps? What types of users might you be trying to reach at the moment? Maybe Simon or Ivar?
Yeah, I can take that. We are working with basically 3 audiences. We are working with big clients that really want to deal with methods in a very different way. Essence doesn't really change a method. It changes the adoption of it. It makes it significantly easier and more empowering to adopt a method using something that is essentialized. Because Essence makes the method not only it makes it active, but also more entertainable. So that's one aspect. I think I just lost track. Can you remind me where I was?
So you were talking about the different users that you're trying to reach.
Yeah. So that was so we are working with also other people who had invented practices. We have a year ago, we basically only had worked with Jeff Sutherland on Scrum, and we learned a lot about how to do that. We don't want to essentialize a method without having the founder of a method or one of the founders of a method involved. So we worked with him, and Jeff expressed that very positive statements, but Essence is the key to success for adopting Scrum. And now we have about 4 or 5 practices and methods that are essentialized that way. For instance, Spotify method. And we also have a pipeline with working with 9 different, let's call it methodologists, and on their methods. We think we can show very quickly, quite soon, that we have a good ecosystem of practices. Today we have about 30, and but we can foresee that we will have hundreds of them. And we're also working with the academics, because I truly believe that this has to be of interest to the academic world. So it's not only, the most important is that it's practical in real use, but of course, if we can get something that reduce the split between industry practice and academic research, it's really good for the industry as well. So we are now, and very soon, we'll be able to deliver products that support uses of Essence and uses of a practice. Sorry, Essence is just the tool to do that. It's like a motor in a car. Most users never see it, and they know that they can push a pedal and they get higher speed. They know that they can brake, and that's about how we see Essence role too. Real users shouldn't have to the final user shouldn't have to be competent in Essence. So I think we will soon release products that are helpful for instance, adoption of Scrum, and hopefully also adoption of Kanban. I think we are not far away from that. So and we're still working with helping big companies. So we learn a lot from that. I think that's maybe you want to add something, Simon.
Probably not. I was trying to respond to some of the things in the chat.
Okay, good.
Well, and one thing that seems to be kind of a theme here that's worth mentioning is the cards in particular. I think they help you get started with Kanban. So some of you folks might be in a Scrum context, you might be in a SAFe context, who knows where you are necessarily, but you might be asking yourselves, how do we start to bring up the conversation around maybe visualizing a bit more? And the card can actually help start that conversation in terms of a feedback conversation like we showed you earlier, or just a simple workshop discussion. It could easily be that you use these cards to help facilitate a greater awareness around these practices. Like recently we saw Nishant ask a few questions here in chat around, hey, what about a work item type? How do I do a work item? What's the difference here? How do I make sense of that? And Nishant may or may not have gone through a Kanban system design class, I don't know, but these cards can actually help to focus a little bit more of that conversation around, do you understand this yet, or are you still learning it? Because a lot of times these things, right, these practices take time to really understand and start to really use effectively. And I think these cards help with that kind of conversation.
And let me add to that, cards have been used for many years, 30 years. Peter Code was very successful in introducing cards for demonstrating how teams work with object-oriented analysis. But most cards are just syntax. They have no underlying semantics. The only semantics that the cards give is the semantics that you intuitively understand. With the Essence cards has a very deep underlying semantics. That means that you can play many more games because they are understandable thanks to the semantics. You can also play, if you play one game, it can have impact on another game you play. So they all, in a way, collaborate to get a better picture of the result.
Lovely. I noticed that Ian Spence, you have your hand up. Now, normally I wouldn't take questions until the end, but obviously you're a particularly interesting person in this story. So do you have anything to add to what the guys have just been saying?
Well, I wanted to try and address some of this. Why do you need these practices in Essence? As Eva said, we have got an essentialization of Scrum, which we did with Jeff Sutherland, that he's used in his training courses and promoted quite widely. We've got an essentialization of Kanban. Do any of you ever want to use them together? Do you want to use Kanban to improve your Scrum?
Well, having these things in the same model with the same semantics will make that an awful lot easier. You'll be able to spot overlap and differences, and you won't have to invent a Kanban method. If where you are is Scrum and you want to improve, Kanban's a great way to improve. When you're looking for work items, if you can pick up, when you're doing Kanban, you want to improve your other practices. So maybe if you can pick those practices up, there are ways to map those practices and their outcomes very readily to the work item types and your Kanban board. So there's a lot of power when you start to be able to bring these things together, and it stops people having to rewrite them and everything like that. So using the Scrum cards and the Kanban cards together can be very powerful to help Scrum teams improve.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Ian, for the guest appearance. My next question was going to be to David. I feel like we've touched on it already, but I just want to check if you have anything specific to add. It was going to be on why, from your perspective, you think the partnership between Kanban and Essence has potential.
So I think anyone who's helping move in the right direction, and I don't mean us from the Kanban perspective, I mean an industry perspective, that we need to move more to an incremental change model. We need to promote the idea that companies should be wired for evolutionary change, and that leaders should be building resilient, robust organizations. Anyone who's helping us move in that direction is someone we want to support. And work that maybe we only support it intellectually, in other cases we support it more in a partnership, an actual business partnership. So I feel that there's a good synergy between Essence and what we're already doing with Kanban. There was a question, I think, from Jorge in Buenos Aires asking, what's the point of Essence if we have KMM already? Well, for those who are not familiar with the Kanban Maturity Model, imagine it's like a very big map. It's a very big map of a territory that shows organizational maturity mapped to Kanban Kanban patterns, and therefore practice adoption. Well, it's a big map, and maps are useful. But if you're at one point on that map right now, where do you want to go next? And the metaphor I have in my head is that imagine that's a scout patrol, and they're out hiking in the mountains, and they've got the map. And the patrol leader says, okay, we could go this way up the valley, or we could go up this path in the mountains, or we could go around the other side here. Which way should we go? And they've got some cards that they can deal out and they can play with in order to debate the different directions they can take in order to form a consensus so that they can be led and all move together as a patrol towards the desired outcome or the next stage on where they're going. So I think Essence is going to help people navigate the map. And the focus of the work that Joey and Simon have been doing is at maturity level 1 and 2. And a lot of the people there will not be using the KMM. They won't be using the map. They haven't quite discovered that if you're going to go hiking in the mountains, it's a good idea to take a map with you. Right. So the Essence cards are going to help keep people alive until they discover the value of maps. And then once they have a map, it's going to help them choose where to go. Yeah. So I think that there's a really good synergy that Essence is working at a level of granularity that we're not paying so far anyway attention to with the KMM. And I've always had the approach that if someone has solved a problem adequately, why would we duplicate that? There are many problems in the universe to be solved. Let's focus on one that people haven't solved. So if Essence is going to help people do what we're doing, That's helping me. It's helping all of us. It's moving us all in the right direction. And why wouldn't we support that?
And we are looking forward to work with a higher levels of maturity too.
Oh yeah, you know, if you get into the high Alps and the mountains get trickier, more navigation tools are more useful. Yeah.
Awesome. Definitely agree that if you're going hiking up a mountain, a map is very helpful. And I love that Essence can help navigate the KMM map. Eva and Simon, anything to add to that before we try to sneak in a couple audience questions?
Yeah,
I think it's good to go to the audience, me at least. Eva?
Okay, so I think following the history of what Dave has done, introductory with the Kanban approach, which basically helped to balance workflow, which became instantly a success. And now KMM, which is a much wider, but more approach to help teams to evolutionary become better. We have to have a starting point. Where am I going in and helping the team? And here, I believe Essence can play another role, namely, you can, with Essence help, identify where the team is, the organization is that you want to help. It has a quite accurate way to identify over 7 dimensions where the team is. And with if we go further, and if a team has adopted practices, other practices on top of Essence, then you get even higher accuracy to find out where you are and what you should do to evolutionary change. So I think this is all to the best for clients, which is our primary objective.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the thoughts. I'm keen, I'd love to get in 1 or 2 audience questions. I know we've maybe got a few minutes left. So, audience, any questions? I can see the chat's been super active. I think a lot of the questions have been answered in the chat as well by the kind speakers and other audience participants. So feel free to raise your hand if you have a question. Feel free to unmute and ask the question, or you can write it in the chat and we can read it out.
If you feel your question hasn't been answered, it's worth repeating it. So because it's been scrolled away and we've lost it.
Yeah,
indeed.
I posted in the chat as well a link to a webpage where you can download the cards and also get some instruction on the games. And then on the wider IJI website, you can find out a lot more about Essence and other cards you can download as well. I don't know if I'll find a link for the Kanban guide as well, because that's a really neat little document that describes Kanban really nicely.
Yeah, I'll add that in just a second here.
Any questions from anyone? Or are you all busy clicking all the links and absorbing the information that's been provided to you tonight?
I do see quite a lot of people from the Kanban coaching community in the audience, and I suspect that most of them were not aware of Essence until today. So I think that it's you've raised awareness significantly in the Kanban community with this session. We do have a hand up from Christiane.
Go for it, Christiane. What's your question?
Hello, everyone. Thank you. So do you have any tip for finance teams and business controls teams to adopt Kanban without resistance?
Yeah, I'm happy to start the answer. I have a feeling David might add a little bit more too. So one of the things we try to teach folks, Christiane, is the idea of starting with where you are now. So when we start to look at Kanban, we start to map out what you've got currently in process, what's happening in your environment. And we teach people how to do this with something called the systems thinking approach to introducing the Kanban method. And right now, that's in a class called the Kanban System Design class. But ultimately, what we're trying to do is map where you are now and also understand some of the pain points you might be having inside your area. So typically, you're trying to find a leverage point, more or less, where I've got this pain, we want to solve it. Here's the system that we've figured out. This is how we operate. And let's see if we can bring those two things together by changing how that thing operates, using some of the pain points there. And so that's a good way to kind of get started in your context. And that's usually something that takes maybe a day or two to do, depending on your environment.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
There was a similar question, and we don't want to turn this into a Kanban training class, but there was a question about work item types. And it's probably one of the two top questions that are asked in any of our training. And one of the Kanban software vendors a decade ago already said to me, the number one problem our clients have is deciding what is the meaning of a ticket on the board. What does it represent? And one of the ways I teach that is I challenge the group in the class and I say, okay, imagine that you're the shift supervisor or the manager of a Starbucks or a similar type of cafe. Describe to me the services that you're offering. And then I give them 5, 10, 15 minutes to talk in groups and come up with a list. And it might take them a minute or two and they say, well, we're in the cup of coffee business. We serve cups of coffee. Yes. Then the follow-up question is, are all cups of coffee homogeneous? Are they all born equal? Well, maybe no. There's filter coffee, drip coffee, there's espresso drinks. And then they start to figure out the different services that a Starbucks provides. Okay, once they've done that, I say, okay, apply that same thinking to your own department, what you do for a living. Who are your customers? What do they ask you for? What do you do to it? And where does it go? And that's how you get started. Then you start looking at, are we working on too many things all at the same time? Is that affecting our quality? Whatever, as Joy said, whatever the pain points are. If our customers are unhappy, the sources of dissatisfaction that we solicit in the workshop, why are they unhappy? Well, they're unhappy because our quality's crap and they have to keep asking us to rework it. Okay, we want to focus on improving the quality. Well, one of the things might be, can we reduce the work in progress so that we can focus more to do things with higher quality rather than multitasking, and so on and so on. And the conversation over what could we do to improve quality is something the Essence cards are going to help with.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the answers, David. Christiane, hopefully that gave you some insight, and also to the person that David addressed earlier. Just to balance it, Jefferson Allen had a question on if there's more agendas like this for Essence, I guess to learn more about it. So maybe Simon and Ivar could give him something to look forward to.
Absolutely. We have a whole sequence of these events in our mind, and we are talking to people about it. But you should also know there are about maybe 18 similar events recorded. So if you are interested, I think we have I have a LinkedIn article. Is it called Learn More About Essence, or is it called Essence for Agility? I can't remember. Anyway, and where we have all, well, it's called Essence for Agility, and where we have all presentations up till today recorded. So if you're interested, you can go there. Oh, here we have something.
I think it's been posted in the chat. So now everyone
that is not that one. That is learn more about Essence. So it's still a good link. But there is another one, Essence for Agility.
For the recordings, if you go to the Essence for Agility meetup homepage, in the description, it's just at the bottom of the description. You might need to collapse the text to see it, but it's on the meetup homepage to find all the recordings, which includes an event or a couple of them that describe Essence in more detail.
The other thing we'll have coming up quite soon is we're about to launch the tool I was using earlier, TeamSpace, which is the Essence specific tool. We're going to launch a version of that initially with Scrum practices, and very soon afterwards with other practices to try to get more mass market adoption of it. There's a whole strategy for it. We're still working out some of the details, but when we do that, we'll want to use this group to tell you all about it and hopefully get your feedback and get you using it. And then we're working on some case studies with how Essence has helped organizations, which should be quite useful, and it'd be good to set up one of these if we can with that as a topic.
Well, there you go, Jefferson. Lots to read, lots to look forward to from Essence and obviously from Kanban as well. Okay, we are a few minutes over, but I hope that I can see we've still got loads of people here. So, clearly it's been a fascinating conversation. I just wanted to take a minute to invite any of the speakers for any closing thoughts before we wrap up for the evening.
I have one very brief thought from the product management hat that I wear a lot. If you have feedback on this, please send it to Simon or me. You can find us here on LinkedIn. You can find us in other places probably. So feel free to look us up and reach out to us if you want to know more. I think you got some links there already to reach out to Ivar's Essence website to try and check out these products and give them a go. But as usual, we're always learning and always evolving here. So if there is some feedback, we'd love to hear it.
Yeah, completely agree. Love to hear feedback. And all these things iterate. The cards, I've already changed them a little bit as a result of the version 2 of the Kanban guide. So we're always looking to improve the products and get better at this. I'll also share a link to, there is an Essence for Agility LinkedIn group that you're welcome to join. And that's a good place if you've got specific Essence questions, because there's quite a lot of people in there that know it very well. That's in the chat just now.
What more can we say? A fantastic event, and there is so much I hope we will do in the future. We are not. This is just one of my favorite expressions is this one. This is not the end. It's not even the beginning of the end. Maybe it's the end of the beginning. And you know who said that? Yeah, it was Winston.
Very
indeed. Under maybe different circumstances, Ivar.
Yes.
But it's a very good point that although Ivar and I have known each other peripherally, we've met a few times over what must be about 20 years. We have discovered that we have a lot more in common as a consequence of this. Ivar spends his time living partly in the Alps, and so do I. And when he's not there, he's in Spain, and so am I. And I'm sure that we will be seeing a lot more. And Simon and I grew up only 30 kilometers apart.
Wow.
So there's a lot of personal chemistry between our two businesses and our groups of people, and it's really been fun to get to know you guys. And I'm sure that, as Ivar said, it might be the end of the beginning.
Well, we're all looking forward to this relationship flourishing and bringing more benefits to the industry. So guys, thank you so much for your time. This is the part where I do my awkward virtual round of applause, so feel free to unmute and join me in an applause for our speakers. There we go. Nothing more awkward than virtual applause over Zoom. And David, thank you for bringing along your dog. Lovely to see you.
This is our company mental health manager.
Yes,
sometimes he likes to attend webinars.
I think every company could do with one of those. Okay, everyone, thank you so much. You can catch the recording on this in a couple of days on the meetup page, and feel free to follow up with Simon and Joey and all the links that have been shared. Have a great evening or a morning or an afternoon, wherever you are, and see you next time.
Thank you.
See you later. Thank you.
Bye.
Cheers.
Thank you.